So this slide is titled Drivers of Long-Term Interest Rates. The first thing you need to realize is that there are many drivers of long-term interest rates. That is, many drivers of bond yields. Dozens and dozens of things can affect bond yields. We're going to keep it fairly simple and just consider some of the main drivers, both in tutorials and in the LMS environment. So what we've got here is two drivers of bond yields or long-term interest rates. But what I've done is, rather than having the loanable funds market and the interest rate on the vertical axis, I've put the bond price on the vertical axis. So we're obviously talking about the demand and supply of bonds. So I've got the bond market here. So the first one, there's a bit of a typo there. It should be expected fall in share prices. So what we've got to do is think to ourselves, well, if there's an expected fall in share prices, obviously the expected fall is in the future, how is that going to impact bond markets? Well, if market investors believe that share prices will fall in the future, they're more likely to move money out of the stock market into the bond market. And when they do that, they will demand bonds. So if people are looking forward and thinking share prices are going to fall, they're going to be selling their shares now, taking that money from the sale of their shares and moving it into the bond market. That means they'll be using that money to buy bonds. And that then gives us the rightward shift in the demand curve. As they demand more bonds, they buy more bonds. That rightward shift in the demand curve pushes bond prices up. And I've just made up some nice round numbers here in terms of the bond price. So bond prices rise from, say, 1 million to 1.1 million. And we know that when bond prices rise, from earlier in this topic, bond yields or long-term interest rates will fall. Okay, so an expected fall in share prices in the future will put downward pressure on long-term interest rates as money moves out of the stock market and into the bond market. The second, we've got second example or second driver is a decrease in investment spending. Now, if there's a decrease in investment spending, companies don't need to borrow as much money. Smaller amounts of investment spending, a lesser need to borrow money. So as companies reduce their need to borrow money, that means they don't issue as many bonds. So the supply curve of bonds shifts to the left. So you can think of this, the first supply curve that I'm tracing with my cursor here, the one that lies to the right. Think of that supply curve as the supply curve of bonds that would have existed had there been no decrease in investment spending. But now with the decrease in investment spending, which is kind of unexpected decrease, the supply curve is now further to the left. Once again, that pushes up bond prices and it will lower interest rates. Now, it's important that you do put a little bit of time and effort into thinking about this intuitively and not simply develop a mechanical understanding of what's going on here. So let's take this for example. What we've found is that a decrease in investment spending pushes bond prices up as there is a decrease in the supply of bonds, which pushes interest rates down, long-term interest rates down. So why would that happen intuitively? Well, hopefully it's reasonably straightforward to many of you. If companies decrease their investment spending, there'll be a decrease in the demand for loanable funds. And with companies demanding less loanable funds, it's going to put downward pressure on interest rates because companies will just be out there not borrowing as much money. And so if you're not borrowing as much money, the price of money falls. The price of money is the interest rate, so the interest rate falls. So just imagine you've got this pool of loanable funds. If companies all of a sudden don't want to borrow as much of that, of course, interest rates are going to fall. And that's what we're seeing here in the diagram on the right, but we're just viewing that fall in interest rates from the context of the bond market through a decrease in the supply of bonds, pushing interest rates down. So for economists, if you said to an economist, what impact will a decrease in investment spending have on long-term interest rates? Just intuitively, they would be able to tell you instantly that it's going to put downward pressure on long-term interest rates. And slowly, that's the point that you need to get to. We're going through it in a very long-winded manner at the moment, because for many of you, you're learning about this for the first time, but that's the way you need to eventually be able to think about these things. Less investment spending means less demand for money, less borrowing. With less borrowing, interest rates are going to fall. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, your reading is going to introduce you to many more drivers of long-term interest rates. And so you need to be prepared to be given a certain economic event or economic shock, like a recession or a boom, and be able to think through and illustrate using diagrams like this what impact that economic shock or economic policy change will have on bond prices and long-term interest rates.